Yeah, my name is David Benaim, and I'm a data specialist. I'll talk a bit more about my role. I have done a lot of analysis and published some articles about COVID in Cambodia. And yeah, I scheduled this, as you know, with ODC before the unfortunate outbreak of the 20th of November. However, I'm going to talk about what I was going to say before, and then I'm going to refresh it with some new data and my thoughts based on the outbreak that's going on right now. So I'm going to share my screen. A think tank called the Lowy Institute in Australia decided to rank 98 countries according to the COVID performance. And they came up with this list of 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I'm going to explain why I think Cambodia deserves to be over here, the number 1 spot. So I'm going to do that during this presentation. Now, over this, I'm going to go through an introduction to me and then how it was before the outbreak, what's been going on since the outbreak, and what kind of things I've been looking at and analyzing since then. Then I'm going to go through where I get my data sources and the cleaning and analysis part. And for that, I'm actually going to show it to you on, I'm going to show it to you how I get the data, including the ODC as the data source, and then how I bring it into Excel, which is where I do most of my analysis, and then how I clean it up using the Excel tools, and even compare countries and do other things like that. And then I'm going to look at what I think are the next steps and what I think could happen in future based on my research. So, kick off with an intro to me. I am a data specialist, so I run a company called Excel Consulting here in Cambodia. In my first job, I was a chartered accountant in the UK, and then I became a Microsoft Excel MVP 1 year ago, and that means that Microsoft puts me in the top 100 Excel people in the world. I have done training now with over 1,500 people, mostly in Excel, but also in other technology skills, including Power BI, that I'll also show you in this session. And I've done consulting with 120 organizations, a lot of which is around data. So I also have a YouTube channel under my name, David Benaim, where I get about 16,000 views per month now. Got 2,500 subscribers. So I do tech tutorials about Excel, Power BI, PowerPoint as well, Microsoft Teams, even Zoom that we're using to record this session. So keep going. So I gave a talk on the 8th of February, which was before the outbreak happened. That was called Cambodia's World-Class COVID Statistics. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the same talk that I gave back then, knowing what I know now. But I'm not going to reference anything that I know now because I'll do that in a later section. So I'm going to kick off with a short talk that I gave about the COVID statistics in Cambodia. And this is related to something that I published with the Southeast Asia Globe called Cambodia's Hopeful COVID-19 Statistics. I've also published an article, worked with the Khmer Times since then, talking about a similar concept. And this was in January. The Khmer Times was around the 15th of February, so shortly before the outbreak happened. So again, now I'm going to go through this talk. It's a short one. It's about 5 to 10 minutes, and it's going to be as if we didn't know that the outbreak was happening. And then I'll talk about the current February 20th outbreak after that. But I'm going to first talk about this. All right, so let's go. So Cambodia is the country with the lowest deaths per population. And by that I mean, in terms of countries with 0 deaths, Cambodia is the one with by far the largest population. As you can see on this chart, the next closest country is our neighbor Laos, and that has less than half of the population of Cambodia. And then it goes even further. And these are the only 5 countries with 0 deaths recorded currently. Now, I get my information from the Worldometer site, and that's something that I'll show you later on, because it is a good way to have the country comparisons like this. But looking at the raw data on its own is not enough because, for example, you could see that the first two are actually cruise ships, they're not countries. Then you get other non-country entities like Western Sahara, and then you even get countries like Tanzania. And Tanzania is an interesting case study because they announced in May 2020 that they were going to stop calculating and stop reporting any COVID statistics. So everything that you see here is only valid up till May 2020. And even though they have obviously low numbers, that is not reflective of what's actually going on in the country. So I did apply certain filters to exclude data when I make some assumptions. So what I exclude is anything that's not a country, anything that has fewer than 20 cases, because that kind of means that they haven't really had an outbreak or they're not necessarily recording it accurately. Any small entity with less than 200,000 as a population, and any place that is not reporting any testing statistics. Because if they're not reporting any testing statistics, then we don't necessarily know exactly what's going on in that country. So if we apply those exclusions, you can actually see that Cambodia becomes the third lowest country in terms of cases per million, and the fifth lowest country in terms of total cases in the world, this being the other ones. Interestingly, Laos and Vietnam are number 2 in terms of cases per million, number 1 and 2, just above Cambodia, which is fascinating because they are, of course, our neighbors. Thailand isn't too far off. Thailand is number 12. Again, I will reiterate that these counts are only before the current outbreak, although they haven't changed that much. So to compare, Cambodia has 27 cases per 1 million, which is ranked number 3, as I showed you. UK and US are not just a little bit different, but they're thousands different. In fact, US has 3,000 more cases per million and is ranked number 156th lowest in the world. So it's a completely different world that they are living in there, unfortunately. So the number that was reported that day was 474, but that doesn't even need to matter so much because if we look at the breakdown here, the sharpest rise in cases actually happened between July and August at a time where it wasn't necessarily a risk because there were no local infections that day, that time period. It was just cases being imported and there were not really many restrictions. So this number of 474 is not really valid. The number that does matter is this number 67. And this is the total number of infections from locally sourced things, so in-country transmissions. And you had a spike around March, April, and then the next spike came around November. And that includes local and community because under epidemiology, they are slightly different, even though both of them contribute to in-country transmissions. So in terms of looking at another country that had similarly good COVID statistics as Tunisia, Tunisia actually opened their borders for tourists on this date, on the 27th of June. And what happened was that after that, it increased quite heavily. And a couple of months later, we started seeing the trajectory go up again. So Cambodia that has decided to close its borders pretty much near the beginning has done a really good job in keeping the numbers from imported cases not leading to local transmissions. But is it hidden? Is there a possibility that Cambodia is just not reporting and the numbers that we're seeing are not necessarily real? So there are 3 reasons why that might be the case. It could be that cases are being detected but not reported. It could be that we're just not testing enough, or potentially that we're testing the wrong people. Now, what's interesting is that Cambodia is getting a lot of external support. The Ministry of Health is getting a lot of external support from these external organizations, which is the WHO, the CDC, and the Institut Pasteur. That means that they are independently run organizations that are assisting the Ministry of Health, and actually all 3 of them regularly say that the Cambodian Ministry of Health is doing a fantastic job with its approach, even better than a lot of Western countries, actually. So then we go through the November incidents, the 28th of November incidents, and that had thousands of contacts that were tested from only 45 cases. Sorry, 45, which was across both incidents in November. And Cambodia tests up to 4 times per contact that is being traced, which is quite different to how it works in the rest of the world, where they often give you one test, and if you're not positive, then they'll just let you go. Whereas Cambodia takes a much more conservative approach to ensure that they can keep their outbreaks under control. But what about rural Stung Treng? Could there be an outbreak in rural Stung Treng that is not being tracked? Well, the truth is that although it's possible, it's unlikely, because what we know about the virus is actually that it works better and it multiplies a lot more in urban areas. So rural Stung Treng or any other rural area in Cambodia is not really the place where you might see an outbreak. Now, if we control it in the urban centers, then that is the primary place where it's likely to have an outbreak. So is it that we're not testing enough? So this is another possibility, that we have tested not enough people in the country. So the tests per 1,000, Cambodia is not that high, but it does fall above Vietnam, Thailand, and Taiwan. And what's another very important statistic that is rarely talked about is the cases per 1,000 tests. And the cases per 1,000 tests is a very important metric that is not always focused on, but the Lowy Institute that I started this presentation with does talk about that. So what that looks at is the number of positive cases per 1,000 tests. So in the US, you have 86 positive cases. This is overall since the pandemic began. In France, you had 73. In Cambodia, you have 1.1. So as you can see, it's very, very, very different. So I would disagree with the people who says Cambodia is not testing enough, because they have this very low statistic. And this is the 4th lowest in the world even. So summarizing everything, I think that Cambodia deserves to be number 1, because it ranks number 1 in the world in terms of deaths and deaths per million, number 3 in the world in terms of cases per million, 4th in terms of cases per test, 5 in terms of total number of cases, and for tests per million, it is not that high compared to some Western countries, but it does rank above Vietnam, Taiwan, and even Thailand. And these were the 6 metrics that the Lowy Institute was using when determining how to compare the countries. So Cambodia actually beats New Zealand in 4 out of 6 of these metrics, Vietnam in 4 out of 6, and Taiwan in 6 out of 6. Now, it was excluded from the count. I'm not sure why, but I did try reaching out to them, but they didn't get back to me. But Cambodia was not one of the 98 countries included. So that is how it was before the outbreak. So we're going to go through what happens from the outbreak. Do you have any questions? Anything you want to interrupt me with right now? Or
I think it is very interesting to understand how data people or data specialists or data analysts is working on the metric. Because actually the everyday people just hurting or just listening to how many cases today, how many cases reported by on the media or from the ministry, but actually we don't really know what the main metric that we should look at, and how it helps us to understand the situation, and what are the measurements that the government or everyone should take. So it is very interesting.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I'm glad you find it interesting. And that leads quite nicely into my next section, because, well, let's talk about it. So the 20th of February, unfortunately, Cambodia detected local transmissions, and it got into the worst and highest risk position that it's been since the outbreak. So this is how it was up till yesterday, yesterday being the 3rd of March. And we can see that this is the trend that's happening in Phnom Penh. Sihanoukville started getting some cases later on, and they've unfortunately gone up to 10 cases 10 cases were the last ones, and Sphai-Rieng later on had 2 cases. But actually the Sphai-Rieng ones were linked to the Phnom Penh cluster, and hopefully that shouldn't lead to another outbreak that's going on there. But what I find very interesting here is that it's quite rare that people see this kind of breakdown. So you talked about, as you were saying, people read the media and they just know what happens today, but they rarely get an outlook that looks like this. That actually means that Phnom Penh, for certain, is actually going down. It did have a rise on the 3rd of March, but since then it's gone down again. So it is an interesting outlook to just see it from this perspective, and much, much more important than just seeing the complete number on its own. Sihanoukville, for example, has been on the rise, and that is something that you can't necessarily see if you just see the total number of cases. So what is worth noting is that the number of testing has increased dramatically. And before the 20th of February event, they were doing about 2.2 thousand tests a day. And then after the incident began, they started with approximately 3,000 tests per day. But they have been steadily rising like this. And in recent days, they have had more than 6,000 tests per day. So this is something that is really, really important outlook, because as we can see, the testing is rising whilst the daily cases are falling overall. Yes, there are some peaks, but it is looking like this, which gives you a lot more validity in the numbers. The number of cases per test since the outbreak started is roughly between 6 and 7 cases per 1,000 tests, which, although is higher than what I initially quoted, which is 1 per 1,000, is still significantly lower than countries that are having a big COVID outbreak. So that's very reassuring, especially if we note that most of the cases being tested are actually contacts that are linked to the 20th of February incident. So I have been, since the outbreak started, I've been doing daily updates with CNE, Cambodian News in English, and I've also been publishing on my Twitter feed. Every day I try to publish something, which is, this is the chart I showed you earlier, and a little bit of insight into that, but very, very short summaries that just looks at rises, just absolute numbers, very, very quick, because it's on Twitter, so it needs to be quick. And sometimes I have more analysis, and this can lead to the CNE style broadcast, where for them I usually make a chart. So if we go to the health sector section, not the one, this one here. So I make this chart for them, and sometimes other visuals as well. So yeah, feel free to follow me on Twitter at Dave Benaim, or check out my updates on CNE. So that is how I've been working since the 20th of February outbreak. The next thing that I'm going to talk about is my data sources. So where I get this information, because it's actually not as easy as it could be.
Yeah.
So my data sources, I start searching every morning at 7:15 a.m. and I look at the news in English, in Chinese, and in Khmer. I read various news sources from these 3 different languages, and of course the official reports from the ministry. So to show you some of those, over here, this is the Chinese media source. I get the Google Translate extension to my browser, and that means I can translate the page quite easily, and it will give not exactly a perfect translation, but it will do something decent. So if I go here, I choose translate this page, then it will give me a decent translation that doesn't make sense necessarily as a sentence, but it's pretty reliable just for the numbers, which is what I want to get out of it. And the Chinese one is probably the best and most reliable one for what's going on in Sihanoukville, whereas the Khmer ones that I look at sometimes can give more of an outlook overall. I also look at the CDC page, the Cambodian CDC page here, and these are where I get the testing numbers from. So every day they publish this. Again, this is a translation, but it shows you the total number of tests that have been done, and how that is broken down per 1 million people. This is since the start of the pandemic. So what I do is I take this number every day, I put it in an Excel spreadsheet, and then I compare it with the number the previous day. This was the previous day. So there's about 6,200 tests that were done in the day. I also look at the Ministry of Health Facebook page. That's another one. And then Fresh News is another quite valuable resource. The Khmer Times in English is another one that I sometimes will look at. But yeah, I look at a combination. This in Khmer Times is the article that I was contributing to. So this is before the outbreak happened. Then I also get some data sources from ODC. So ODC is a great place for resources. They do publish this dashboard, which is very nice. I have my own dashboard that I'll show you as well soon. And they also have this, which is this page where they have all the PDFs of the reports from the ministry, and then this CSV file here. So this is really a great resource for understanding what's happening, because it breaks it down very, very nicely with one row representing each person who has been infected since the start of the outbreak. So actually, if I look at the first row, created app, this is the date that they tested positive, 27th of January 2020, and it goes right until the 3rd of March, which when I'm making this video is the most recent updates. So we can analyze this data, which I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. But let me go back to what I've got here. Worldometer is another site. So this is where I go to for my country comparisons, and I get the data on how Cambodia compares to other countries in the world. So it has a table here with total cases, new cases, total deaths, new means since yesterday, recoveries, and then tests here as well. And if I look for Cambodia in the search one, I can see that the tests, they've approximated it to 500,000. But if I go to 2 days ago, they have this number, which does actually match to the Ministry of Health, the Facebook page that I showed you earlier. So that is how I get these details. And then I sort of download them and analyze them a little bit in Excel. So the dashboard that I have built is this one. It uses a Microsoft application called Power BI, which I love using. And this is, again, up till before the 28th incident had been recorded. And here I'm looking at local infections, community infections, and imported. 67, this was the number that I mentioned earlier. And 86% of all cases before we had the outbreak were actually imported cases, which had very, very little risk of being a transmission in Cambodia. So I also published this. This is another page where you can look at a timeline. So this is in the first year of COVID. You can see what's going on, and this is where the first wave happened, and then you can go forward to the next wave. You can see it's gone up. So this is trying to explain what's happened here. So you can get to this dashboard through the article that I wrote for the Southeast Asia Globe, which I'll link to, I'll show you in a second. And then this is explaining all the key events that have happened there. From the Westerdam cruise ship, the Malaysia Festival, the Viking cruise, mass testing in Siem Reap as to flat quarantine. These were some of the newspaper headlines. And then the first community transmission on the 28th of November, the other one on the 3rd of November, and then on the 31st of December, where Thailand's border controls are heightened because Thailand starts having an outbreak. And then I had a breakdown by demographic, and this is completely from the ODC data, where I'm looking at it broken down by age range, by gender. Interestingly, by gender, it was almost all male. I think it was 80% male until you started getting breakdowns earlier on. So if I was to select previous days, I can see the breakdown of how it happened there. And and I can select, control click, select these months, and you can see that it is mostly male earlier in the year. But then once we hit December and January, females start being more prominent, and it's mostly female. So this is because a lot of the returnees from Thailand were females. This is the number of days that they had the virus, how many days they are infected. So it is kind of going down. To date, we haven't had anyone who's been released from hospital since the 20th of February incident, which has been just under 2 weeks. So it kind of is in line with this. Hopefully in the next few days, we should be getting some people who recover. Again, this recording is done on the Thursday the 4th. So yeah, and this is the number of recoveries. And this is foreign versus Khmer. So in terms of how you can access this, you can look at the Southeast Asia Globe statistics. And I can give a link as well. So this is the article that I wrote. And if you scroll down, you can get the dashboard appearing here like that. Click here for mobile view. We'll open it up for a mobile and in a separate window. But this is the article that I wrote that you can read in its entirety if you want to. With a lot of these same things, looking at the Lowy Institute, it's kind of what I base my talk on, and a lot of sources for my data are in hyperlinks here as well. So, yeah, I showed you this CDC Facebook page is where I get my testing data. And then for breakdowns, so for me, interesting breakdowns is by province. This is the 2 in Svay Rieng, mostly in Phnom Penh and Siem Reap second, and a breakdown by nationality as well. Chinese have made up most of it. It's about 3/4 have been Chinese, and then Vietnamese and Khmer have been about 10 to 12% each. But obviously it does change day to day. So now looking at some cleanup and analysis statistics and how I got the data and how I analyze it. Because I think this is important to show how I get from the source into what I actually use in my analysis. Do you have any comments you want to make before we move on?
The local transmission, I mean the community transmission in November, it has happened that because of we don't really follow the measurement from the ministry or from the WHO. We don't wearing mask properly. We don't keep the social distancing, and that is why it become bigger.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really good point. I also keep close attention to the hotspot map and encourage people to do the same. Actually, with the hotspot map, on the first day it came out was last Sunday. They published the location, so I created a Google Maps with the hotspot, and I updated it on the Monday. And then later on that day, I saw that the ministry created their own map, so I stopped updating my own. But the hotspot map is really important. Make sure that if you have been to one of those locations in the dates that are relevant, that you follow the guidelines of what to do, which is just be careful as you're going through that. So yeah, that's been really good. That's been a good measure that the ministry have done this time versus the previous times. They've been doing that, and they've been tracking people with the QR codes as well. So yeah, and as you were saying, the timeline I think is the most important thing, and verifying the data. That is absolutely, as you said, why I go to many different sources and I check. Sometimes there's a few differences, so I do follow up, but I work with Cambodian News in English, CNE. Every morning we message each other at 7 a.m. with what we found, different sources that we're looking at. ODC does update the data pretty well as well, so that is something that I look at, particularly if I want a breakdown of even more types of dimensions like gender or age group as well. That's a really good one, and that's what I'll use to show my demo right now. On that one, cleaning and analysis. And in this one, yeah, as I said, most of my data sources for the analysis perspective comes from ODC and the Worldometer site. So I'm going to go through how I get them, what I do with them, and how I can prove some of the statistics that I showed you earlier. So let's go in here. I already downloaded this earlier in this session. So as you can see, this is a data set that I get. It looks quite messy, which is what typically happens when you have something downloadable as a CSV file. This is pretty common, but we're going to try and clean this up and then analyze it. And a tool that is fantastic in Excel, most people don't know this exists, but it's something called Power Query. This is in the Data tab. If you go to From Table or Range, I can say my table is headers, okay? And it brings up this whole new window that's not even Excel anymore. And Power Query is a fantastic tool when it comes to analyzing data. So you can do all sorts of transformations. For example, I'm going to choose the columns that I want. I'm going to say that this is nationality, province, gender, age, and then I want created at, that's the date, local and foreign transmission. I'm going to leave out a lot of the other things because they're not that important. Maybe recovered date I'm going to keep. Press OK. And then I can create some other things. So I'm going to create some age bands. Go to Add Column, and you can do a column from examples. And here I'm going to say that this person is between 60 to 69. Just getting it from here. Then it tries to guess it. It's not quite right, but I can say 30 to 39. And then it puts them in the right brackets. I'm going to say this is age bands and press OK. I can also then convert these into one column that says local or imported. And to do that, I can add a conditional column. This is very powerful. It's a lot easier than writing if formulas in Excel. So I can say this is the source, and it's going to say if local equals 1, then in country, and then, well, I'm going to go a little bit more complex. I'm going to say if foreign trans equals 1, then it's imported. But in terms of whether something is a community outbreak or a local infection, essentially local means we know exactly where the source is, but community means we're not sure. So things that were before the 28th of November were deemed to be local, whereas the community event, you probably saw that it said the first community transmission was the 28th of November. So since then, they've been community transmissions. So I'm going to say if it's not foreign, then if the created at is before, and then I can choose November over here. So you can do a lot of this stuff without writing custom code. I'm going to do 27th, then it is local, otherwise it is imported. Otherwise it is community transmission here. So press OK. And then I can do some other things like this one. I don't need the time, so just date and date only, and this one as well, date and date only. And then I can delete these two columns, so select them and press delete. Then I could rename them, but I'm just going to speed up this process. So I'm going to close and load, and then I go back to Excel. This is going to be into a table in a new worksheet. And then I can analyze this data. So from here, I can go to insert a pivot table. Now I'm going to save it because at the moment it's a CSV. So I'm going to save it as an XLSX file. This is COVID ODC analysis, like this. And then from here, I'm going to go to insert a pivot table in a new worksheet. And I'm going to say, well, what is the breakdown by province? I can say province there, and I can choose, since everyone is a case, I can just sort of drag this and make it a count. So this is now number of cases, like this. So we get to 909, which is the count as of Thursday that have been announced. But if we want to look at something more specific to do with the 28th of November incident, we can look at created at, and I can put that, for example, in rows. I'm going to ungroup them like this. I'm going to take out province, and I'm going to filter where the date is after the 19th or the 18th of February 2021, like this. So these are the cases that have been reported. There are slight differences depending on which sources you use. But then what's interesting as well is then I can look at age bands, and I can see this in age bands looks like this. Or I can put it in columns, and I could see that these are the age bands for them. So if I want to, I can just create a visual that looks at how it's broken down by age band. So let's put created at in filters because we're going to do something there, and I'm going to just select everything that is after, well, we just want the local. Let's just select all of these just to be quick. I could do this with a formula, but since there aren't that many of them, or with an automation, since there aren't that many of them, I can just do them like this. So these would be them, and then if I put them in rows, this is 4 to 5 includes imported. I can go to insert a bar chart, and you can see that this is how they're broken down. So this is actually quite good news in terms of risk, because it means that the people that are most at risk fall within these ones, and there are very, very few of them. There's only about 3 people over the age of 60. So that is pretty good news, because it means that although the infections are very bad, from what we know about the COVID virus, they aren't at particularly high risk of death or serious illness. Of course, it could happen, but it's good to see that the majority are in this age bracket, which is actually a little bit different to how it was before COVID. If I go back to the dashboard that I had here, I can see in this page that I had less of a skew to 20 to 40 and more between 60 and 69. So that's kind of currently changed, which means the people who are coming out of the outbreak, there's very, very few of them in the vulnerable populations. I can also get a breakdown by gender if I put that in columns and see how it is here. Slightly more females than males, but I can, if I want to, add a filter also to only include the local infections, like that. So this is some things that I do when I want to analyze the data from ODC. Let's look at the data from Worldometer next. So if I go to the Worldometer site here, I can take this URL, and let me go back to my this workbook here. I've copied and pasted it, but I can do something to make it a little bit more robust. If I again use Power Query, go to data from web, and then I can paste the URL here. So what this does is it means it will keep it refreshed and up to date, like that. So I can just refresh it within my Excel, and it will keep the latest numbers. But for speed up in this video, I'm just going to take this one that I used. So it's the same data, I just copied and pasted it, but it takes a few minutes, which I don't want people to take time on. So I'm just going to create this and grab it into Power Query the same way as before. I'm going to close and load that immediately because I have another sheet in here where I have the list of countries. Now, I'm going to get some demographic data about these countries. Another really cool new Excel trick is you can have some country names, you can go to data, and you can choose that these are geography. And this will convert them to something that is linked live to get some demographics. So these only include countries because the Worldometer site, as I showed before, includes some things that are not necessarily countries. So over here, I can go to, for example, Spain, and it has all of this information about Spain directly in the file. I can go to, for example, Cambodia as well. If I just filter for Cambodia. So I can click on Cambodia and I can see the card, the capital city, who the leaders are, the largest city, population, even some other stuff like life expectancy, birth rate, fertility rate, mortality, urban population, which is a big one for COVID. And I'm going to remove that. And I'm actually going to take Cambodia into somewhere else because you can actually break this down further. If I go here, I can see the subdivisions or the provinces. I can press plus, and then I can see them all here. And from here, I can actually extract the population of all of the provinces in Cambodia. That's directly within Excel. Only available if you have the Office 365 version of Excel. Well, the Power Query is available from 2016. So from here, I'm going to do some analysis. So I'm going to extract the population. I'm going to extract the urban population, which is another one. And then I'm going to also extract the life expectancy because that could be linked to some COVID stuff. And then I can create a formula just using the regular Excel equals urban divided by total population. And then I can make these into a percentage like this. And this is % urban. So I've grabbed this directly from Excel. Now this feature is using an Excel table, which is insert table. Highly recommended if you're not currently using them because they keep the formatting the same as you expand and they work well with Power Query. So I'm going to take this and go to data and from table or range as well. And then I'm going to have the two queries and I'm going to combine them. So this was my Worldometer list. I can just rename it to Worldometer data. And here I have my country list. So I want to combine them for a few reasons. Firstly, I want to remove things that are not countries, like World, Western Sahara. Secondly, I want to bring in other data, like population, urban, and these ones as well. Now they do have errors, so I'm going to select them. Errors are because sometimes the data doesn't exist. In Transform, I can replace errors with a blank value, which I'm going to write null here. I do have a lot more Power Query videos on my YouTube channel if you want to learn how to do that. It is a tool that I think is just invaluable. People don't use it enough. So from this country column, I can choose to merge queries, and I can merge this with my country list. Just click on the country, make sure they match, and it's matched 181 out of 222 countries because the others are actually not countries. If I choose something called an inner join, it will only return those rows, not the ones excluded. So that returns 181 rows. There are other types of joins. For example, if I want to know what is not a country, I can do the left anti-join, and then all of these are not actually countries recognized by the UN. Well, some of them are, like Micronesia and Marshall Islands, but they're kind of too small to be worthwhile analyzing. So I'm going to choose the other one, which is the inner one. Again, I know I'm going through this quite fast, but you can rewatch this video and you can see other videos as well. So now I've got this data. I wanted to prove that Cambodia was how Cambodia ranks in terms of cases per million. So I said in my slide, I said I'm going to exclude anything that's not a country. I've done that. Anything with less than 20 cases, greater than 20. And in population that I took, I'm going to extract. This is from my other one. I'm going to filter out anything with a population that is, so I'm going to do greater than or equal to, for example, 200,000. Everything else gets left out. And anything without testing data, I'm also taking out. So wherever total tests is null, I'm going to remove empty. So there's nothing with total tests. So to recap those filters, I showed them in my slide earlier, is these ones. Anything that's not a country is excluded, anything with less than 20 cases, small population, and anything that's not publishing test numbers. So after that, I can go to rank it by first sorting it in terms of deaths, in terms of cases per 1 million, sort ascending like this. And then I can go here and I can add a column and choose an index column from 1. You'll see what that does. It just ranks it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is the lowest country in the world, the second lowest, the third lowest. Let me move this to the beginning. So it's next to my countries. As we can see, Cambodia is now number 4. So it was number 3 when I made that, but it's still number 4, which is still very, very impressive in terms of cases per million. So this is how you can do the rankings. I also can then rank it in the other metrics. So I can search for the test per cases per test is the other one that I did. So I can choose to click on total cases and then click on total tests, this one, and then I can choose add column and I'm going to divide them. I tend to do times 1,000, so I'm going to multiply by 1,000, so it's cases per 1,000 tests. And then if I rename this, so this is going to be cases per 1,000 tests, then I can rank it from smallest to largest, and then I can add another index column from 1. So this is going to be cases per 1,000 tests ranking. And then I can move that to the beginning. And I can see that now Cambodia is number 7. So it's gone down a little bit. It used to be number 4, but it's still pretty decent. And how close is it to the others? Let's see. So these are all pretty close. Cambodia's this one, so it's probably going to fall below this. But then it does rise fast. Once it gets past 2, which is number 11, I don't think it'll go further than that for a while. So yeah, that's how I come up with my rankings and my statistics. And I did also want to show you Power BI because I have some stuff here that I've been looking at that I haven't yet published. So lowest countries. Power BI is a tool that works a lot like Excel. In fact, if you go to transform data, Power Query is exactly identical. The add column tab that I showed you, a few other things. This is a very complex one that we have built that can look at lots of other demographic breakdowns. But what I did end up building was this sheet here. So let me show you this because I find this really, really useful and interesting. I can say I want to see the top 20 countries, lowest to highest, and then it will show me the lowest to highest in terms of cases per million. This is using the data before the outbreak, so 27 cases per million, then total cases, and then tests. And you can even hover over every country and get what that is looking like at that stage. So this is something that I built together with my colleague Joe. And then this is in terms of cases per tests, also lowest 20. Cambodia was 4th, but it was also quite low when it came to testing per population. But what's interesting is this. So this plots them on a map in terms of lowest cases per million. And as you can see, all the countries, the 20 lowest, all fall basically in this block, maybe with China as an exception. They are all tropical regions, as you can see here. And that for me is really fascinating. If I go more, if I go 25, then I can see that the trend continues. If I go a little bit higher, like 40, I can see that I start getting countries in other regions. Australia, for example, Mongolia, they're not in the tropical regions as well. And then if I go highest to lowest, it's also very interesting, because if I look at the countries that are worst affected by COVID, so this is the highest to lowest in terms of cases per million, the 70 countries, we can see that essentially Europe is almost completely covered within this range. And bearing in mind there's only about 150 countries in this study, I can tell you exactly how many there are. So it goes up till 163. So there's 163 countries. So 82 is effectively half of those countries. And effectively, Europe is so heavily affected compared to the countries in the middle of the world. Even North Africa, but the countries in the middle, like here, very, very few of them fall within this. Maldives does, but Maldives opened their borders for a long, long time to tourists. So yeah, this is what I find really fascinating in some of the COVID stats that I have researched. Going back into this, so finally my next steps prediction. So another analysis that I've been looking at is comparing Cambodia's current outbreak to the recent outbreak in Vietnam. So Vietnam has had an outbreak from about 1 year ago, and this is the number of days since each outbreak began. As you can see, Vietnam started a lot higher and was fluctuating a lot more. But what's very interesting is seeing how much they mirror each other. So in day 12 since the outbreak, both of them had another peak. Now, this is pretty fascinating for me, because we know now that Vietnam has mostly contained their outbreak completely, which is very credit to them. They have done a fantastic job in their COVID management. But hopefully this can help us predict what's going to happen with Cambodia in the future. And this is kind of looking positive. Of course, every country has their own approach, and Vietnam's is slightly different to Cambodia. However, the government intervention measures have somewhat been similar since the start of the pandemic. So obviously the climate is very similar for the south of Vietnam, but the north of Vietnam gets a lot colder. So I predict, as far as we could see deaths per million and deaths, I think Cambodia will still come out of this current outbreak, hopefully without any deaths. And that is because of the age demographic breakdown that I showed you earlier. Cases per million, cases per test, this, I don't know where it's going to come out, but we just did this live. It's currently number 7 here. I think it's very unlikely it'll go below number 11, because there's a big jump after that. Sorry, that was cases per test. Cases per million, it's also falling, but I don't think it'll fall that far either. And hopefully eventually this Lowy Institute, which is the think tank that creates this analysis in Australia, will start considering Cambodia and including that, and really reflecting how fantastic a job the Ministry of Health and everyone involved has done in containing COVID in Cambodia.
I think the most interesting that how you analyze is the data, because it only using the except but the most important thing is about the source of data. And I'm thinking about this is how the open data movement or the open data concept is about. We can do it a lot, like as you as a data specialist, without the data, without the source, without a diversity of data, it will limit you to access what is going on and how you can predict what will be going on, and gives some like a recommendation to like the stakeholder what you should do in the future, what the decision for you to make in this type of situation. And I can see a lot that because all these things was likely we aggregate the data and we make it public, and we not really do the analysis. And I'm very impressed of the data that you've been using from different sources, even from ODC, and you analyze it and you visual it, and it's quite very interesting when you do it as a global like the dashboard. So you can see what is going on now from like a European, like in the Southeast Asia, and like let me thinking about when we're talking about a developing country or developed country or less developed country, and that's the income really really related to the good pandemic management, or does it really link to the geographic, or does it really link to the resource of each country? And that really tells a lot.
Yeah, I mean, no, those are some very good points that you bring up. So, yes, I did show on the map the lowest countries. A few things to bear in mind is that a lot of them were lower income countries, but the fact that they are, have a low latitude of tropical, i.e. below the Tropic of Cancer and above the Tropic of Capricorn in terms of latitude somewhere between 0 and 23 degrees, that can mean a lot of things. It could mean that there is warmer temperatures. It could mean that there is less fluctuation in temperatures year round. It could mean that there is higher humidity. It does mean all of those things, but it could also be from a byproduct of those. It could be from the fact that because it's higher temperatures, people spend more time outside. And when you spend more time outside, you have higher vitamin D, and also you are in an outdoors environment where viruses are less likely to spread. Of course, they can spread there, but it is slightly less likely. So yeah, it could mean that. I have done further analysis as well. Of course, as I said, I'm not in the medical sector, so there is a lot that medical professions know about this pandemic and this virus a lot better than me, and even statisticians that work a lot more. The data that I have shown you, although we're calling it statistics, it's not deep statistics. I have done ranking of highest to lowest, and I've done trend lines. That's as far as I've gone. I haven't done regressions, or although I have done that separately, but I haven't done any complex statistics analysis really. But that's why I love the Power Query tool, to be able to grab that data. Yeah, we're never going to know, I think, in full what is making countries better or worse approach to COVID. Certainly government intervention does count. The fact that Cambodia closed their borders and had the 2-week quarantine very early from close to the start was very strong. Something that the UK didn't implement until last month, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. So Cambodia was well ahead of the curve of some of the most developed countries, which is fascinating. The vaccinations, of course, is the next step, and it's good to see that Cambodia this week got some vaccinations from AstraZeneca in the UK and the Sinopharm in China, which also is not fully able to publish its final stage statistics because it hasn't reached that, but the interim phase 3 statistics look like it's 81% effectiveness, which is pretty good actually. So yeah.
Okay, I think I have learned a lot, David, today with you for your sharing session. Even for the data is very big, it's complicated with Excel that I don't really have a very strong fundamentals on it, but I can see, I can go to your YouTube channel and I see a lot of tutorial video you do on that related to the using Excel, Microsoft Excel. And again, thank you so much for joining the event Open Data Day 2020 ODC, and the theme of this year is very interesting, and your data is also very interesting as well. And I hope to have you join for in the future collaboration together.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Yeah, sure. And to remind you, you can follow me on Twitter at Dave Benaim. And my YouTube channel, you can just search for my full name, David Benaim. That is my YouTube channel, with a lot of how we did these things are covered in there as well. All right.
Okay, stay safe.
Yeah, stay safe. Thank you very much. And
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care.